The Lumia 950, $550 unlocked, $600 with AT&T, isn't much of a looker. Its face is nondescript, save for a Microsoft logo, 5-megapixel front camera and an easy-to-miss sensor meant to identify your eyes. All of that sits just atop a pocket-friendly 5.2-inch WQHD AMOLED display. The 950's backside is more interesting, and not just because of the shiny, metallic Windows logo inset a few millimeters north of center. Beyond that lies a tritone flash, the better to capture natural colors, my dear, a single speaker and a 20-megapixel camera sitting between the two. Thankfully, what's inside is a little more tantalizing. If it were an Android phone, the 950's hexa-core Snapdragon 808 chipset and 3GB RAM would put it firmly in the upper middle class. There's another version of the 950, the XL, that comes with a bigger screen and an even more potent processor, but there's more making Windows run smoothly than just pure power. Remember, Windows Phone has almost always performed smoothly even on straight-up weak hardware, so my expectations going into this were pretty high. More on that later, though. Under that removable polycarbonate back sits a removable 3,000 mAh battery that plays nice with the Qi wireless charging standard. The battery is flanked by a nano-SIM slot and a hard-to-spot microSD slot just under that. You might not need it too since there's 32GB of internal storage waiting for you, but hey, who couldn't use up to 200GB of additional storage space? Leave it to Microsoft to include what many Android device makers just won't. And while we're talking about things that Android-friendly OEMs don't all agree on, the Lumia 950 also use a USB Type-C port for charging and data transfer. The Lumia 950's 5.2-inch screen does a fine job packing in those pixels, 564 pixels per linear inch, but in other respects it's less than stellar. First up, it's just not as bright as the devices like the iPhone 6s or the Moto X Pure Edition, and whites take on a distinctly greenish cast. It should come as no surprise that blacks are deep and sumptuous since we're in an old country, and colors rendered on this screen do at least show more depth than on others. That said, the general dimness of the screen means those colors often feel a little muddy. You'll notice this more in photos with lots of warm colors. At the very least, you've got the option to swap between standard, vivid and cool color profiles, as well as tweak the color temperature, tint and saturation from the extras section in the settings. There's also a bit of space between the display panel itself and the sheet of Gorilla Glass covering it, but viewing angles were generally fine anyway. No weird color distortion when you peek at the screen askance. At best, Microsoft's screen choice gets the job done. The same could be said of the single speaker sitting just to the right of the camera, actually. Rear-facing speakers have always been a pet peeve of mine, but the 950 is capable of cranking out some loud, if sometimes muddy, sound. Your audiobooks and YouTube videos will sound fine, just don't expect to gain any new aural insight into your favorite tracks. Let's be honest, you're not here for the hardware, are you? Here's how Windows 10 Mobile's big bits come together on the 950. First off, Windows Phone devotees will have a little acclimating to do. Most of Windows Phone's broad strokes, the home screen full of live tiles, the minimalist app launcher, the action center we got in WP 8.1, are still here and act as intuitive anchors for people trading one mobile version of Windows for another. Peer beyond the familiar facade, though, and some big changes quickly become apparent. Consider the Windows Store, for instance. Gone are the big fonted categories, replaced with a more nuanced look in line with its desktop counterpart. More importantly, Microsoft says it tweaks the algorithms that dictate which apps get recommended to you and when. It's a very subtle change, only really apparent after you've been a user for a while, and I haven't noticed a real leap in quality of recommendations. Frankly, old-school Windows Phone's store was a sleek-looking mess. This new version lacks some of the original's style but makes up for it with pure functionality. The stock Messages app has grown dramatically, too. In addition to firing off standard texts, you also have the option of linking it to your Skype account for more of an all-in-one experience. Well, more or less. From your point of view, SMS and Skype messages are folded into the same threaded conversation. Unless the person you're talking to also has a Windows 10 phone, they'll just get those messages in two different places. You might also notice a curious blue knob in the corner of the keyboard while you're thumbing out those messages. Think of it as a software version of little red nub on ThinkPads. It's meant for fine-grained control over the cursor, but it moves so slowly I basically gave up on it. Nokia's love of photography manifested in devices like the PureView 808 and the Lumia 1020, and Microsoft was more than happy to try and keep that tradition alive. The act of snapping a photo is remarkably fast, punctuated by an ersatz shutter sound and a brief darkening of the screen. Resulting snapshots tend to look incredible by default on the 950's pixel-dense display, with bright poppy colors and loads of detail to pick out. The real magic, though, happens after the photo's already been taken. Pop into the camera roll and Windows will mention it's applying some finishing touches to the most recently taken photo. A moment later that photo will subtly change, usually for the better, as Windows takes the edge off overexposed spots and restores a touch of reality to colors that sometimes feel overmagnified. Very helpful. That's not to say that immediate post-processing is always a good thing. I snapped a few shots of an elf figurine under some diffused lights and the colors were crisper and more dramatic before the camera app decided to wash them out. The 950 even does surprisingly well in low light conditions, though you'll still never completely escape the grain that plagues small smartphone camera sensors. That's where the software really helps. While snapping a photo, even one that gets saved as an 8MP JPEG and a 16MP DNG, is super fast. A tap on the floating menu lets you manually focus, not to mention fiddle with white balance, shutter speed, ISO and exposure with those trademark circular sliders. Kudos to Microsoft, and Nokia, for making one of the more elegant shooting experiences you'll find. Here's the rub, though, while the 950 has a great camera, it doesn't have the edge over the competition as older Lumias. Modern smartphone cameras have gotten so good that it takes a seriously special combination of sensor and software to push the industry forward. I still prefer photos taken with the likes of the Galaxy Note 5, though the 950 generally punches in the same well-respected weight class as the iPhone 6s.